and they brought us all into this school. And then let me check that. And then when they closed, she went to the sixth grade, and I had her in the sixth grade. That's great, in the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So then after that, I went into Mount Hope Junior High. And I was just surprised at a lot that the white kids did not know. That we were not behind them at all. We actually were in front of them. We were more advanced because in the segregated schools, there were normally multiple grades, right, in the same classroom. So when I was in the fourth and fifth grade, we're in that same classroom with fourth graders, fifth graders, and sixth graders. And so what Ms. Watkins would always do, she would let the underclassmen study at their pace. So in the fourth grade, if you could do sixth grade math, you did sixth grade math. If you could do fifth grade math in the fourth grade. So she was always challenging us to be challenged. And so that's just the way we have been taught. And the kids from the white schools had been in one grade in the room, and everybody studied at the same pace, and the more advanced students were moving at the same pace as the slower students. I could see how that had hindered them and hurt them. And so my elementary school education was kind of incredible. My middle school education, junior high, it was okay. And then by the time we get into high school, then you're really starting to see maybe a decline in the overall educational climate, right? And you're starting to see black kids lose interest, right? Something happened that almost never happened. Black kids are dropping out of school, which was almost unheard of during segregation. And so as I've observed this and looked back, now it's more obvious to me the downside of desegregation. I understand why the thought leaders, people like Thurgood Marshall, one of the chief architects of the combination of cases that culminated in Brown versus Board of Education. I understood why they felt that until we had the opportunity to go in integrated schools, that we would not have the opportunity to prove that we could compete in an integrated environment. I really understood that. I understood how they felt that we had to be in buildings that had better facilities and had biology labs and science labs and physics labs and microscopes and all those type of things. I really understood that. And I know there was a tremendous benefit to integration / desegregation. But I think the unintended consequence that even the thought leaders could not have imagined that would happen. The first thing that happened is that there was a massive layoff of black teachers. Once these schools were consolidated, right, the white teachers got all of the prime jobs in the prime locations, and many of the black teachers had to take lesser jobs further away from home and outside their community. That's the first thing that we saw. All these black teachers that taught at Du Bois Elementary, some of them had gone to Du Bois Elementary, gone to Du Bois High School, went off to Bluefield State or Western State College, the only two places blacks to go to school in West Virginia at the time to get a teaching certificate or degree, and then they came back home to teach for the first time. They didn't have to travel 30, 40 miles to go somewhere to take a job. Secondly, many black administrators that have been principals, that were leaders, excellent leaders, they were demoted and they had to go and take teaching positions in the school. That happened quickly and almost immediately, right? Another thing that happened over time, and there's a book, and I wish I could think of the author's name right now, she's written, and she did this analysis that between the time desegregation starts in 55, 56, thereabout, up into the 1990s, there had been like 100,000 black teachers, basically, and administrators that had been forced out of the public school system because of the reduction in the number of teachers and administrators. The second thing that was unintended consequence, it really was the dismantling, really, of the community. Prior to that, you had all of these people living in close proximity to each other. And I heard people talk about on the west side of Charleston, when you had Dr. Hobson, who was a medical doctor, living in the west side of Charleston, owned 3 buildings there on 2nd Avenue, right? And you had Dr. Norman, right? And you had Miss Murray C. Snow. You had brilliant people. They lived in the neighborhood among the people. They taught in the school system. And so the lower income people, had the benefit of living in close proximity with the most brilliant minds in our community. And it was a true community. Community comes from two words, common and unity. What we share in common and where we unified. And so in the Black community, historically, we shared in common a vision, a passion, desire that was radical and militant and strident for high academic achievement. And that created a tremendous amount of unity. So now you start seeing the out-migration of the Black middle class as they start to move away from the lower middle class, from the working poor, and from the poor. Thirdly, you witness the dismantling of the economic base. Once the middle class starts to depart from the community, they're normally the shopkeepers, they're the business people, they're the ones that's running the businesses. And so the economic base starts to be dismantled, and as you desegregate, then the larger white business community, they're able to have access to the African American community for business and commerce and trade. And so now Black dollars no longer spend a night in the neighborhood, right, or in the community. So a dismantling of the institution, public school system, the dismantling of the community in terms of this inter-economic community that existed, and then the outmigration of the middle class, leaving behind the lower middle class, the working poor, and the poor in itself. And that's been a major downside to desegregation / integration that we've never quite figured out how to deal with it, how to handle it, right? How to compensate for it. And so we see the continuous downward spiral in terms of African American students, their academic performance. And one of the things I would like to highlight, because there's data and statistics that point this out, I refer to it as the silent underlying social condition. The silent underlying social condition, unrecognized, unaddressed, and not fully understood. And what I'm talking about is the excessive discipline and the suspension of Black children, low-income children, children with disability, and children in child foster care from the public school system around the nation and in West Virginia. And so when we first really delved into this back in 2015, after a major report from the University of Pennsylvania where they had compiled the data on the 13 states, or 15 states that make up the South, right? And they compiled all this data on discipline, suspension, expulsion, et cetera. And West Virginia is included in the report as being a state where African Americans are suspended at twice the rate of non-African American students. And this has gone on for decades. So I went on this odyssey to try to figure out how long has this been going on, right? And why didn't anyone say anything about it? So I went up to the Culture Center. They're in the archival library. And sure enough, in 1976, the West Virginia Human Rights Commission had been directed by Governor John D. Rockefeller IV to do some type of study because there was anecdotal stories being told that Black students were being disproportionately suspended from schools, right? And this was in 1976. They only looked at Kanawha County, and what they found in the select school in Kanawha County they looked at, that Black students were being suspended from school at over twice the rate of white students. This was 1976. So then in 1980, there was kind of a follow-up study was done, and the same thing. So we knew about this problem in 1976. It was confirmed in 1980, but there's no record where any steps were taken to do anything to address the disproportionate discipline, suspension, and expulsion of African American students from the public school system. No record of any action being taken during that period of time. The reason I call this the silent underlying social condition, because it's been going on for decades. And so what it has done in effect is contribute to the undereducation of masses of Black people and poor white children and kids with disabilities and kids in the child foster care system. A total diseducation over the years. We've been paying to send kids to school one of the highest per capita expenditures in the country is in West Virginia, paying to send them to school, and then once they get there, they have been stereotyped by teachers and administrators, and in many cases subjected to discipline that is unfair, that is uneven, and that is more punitive than what it should be. And it has, in effect, de-educated a large number of young people. And now there's data that actually proves that to be this case. The West Virginia Department of Education, back in 2022, released a report. Actually, in 2012, they compiled a report that showed this disproportionate suspension and discipline for black children. They never fully released it to the public, even though they had it. So then when the University of Pennsylvania report came out in 2015, they act like they were surprised. And they had a report 3 years before the University of Pennsylvania's report. We started advocating for the state of West Virginia in 2015 for them to take some action on this matter. And they've yet to do anything, to do absolutely nothing. Then in 2020, we go to the legislature, we being the Tuesday Morning Group. The legislature passed a bill, Senate Bill 723, that required the Western Department of Education to do a thorough analysis and to collect data and to issue a report on school discipline, desegregating it by race, by socioeconomic status, by disability status, and by foster care status, and develop a statewide plan, right, to address the problem. They gave them 2 years to do it. In July of 2022, they issued the report, but they did not submit any plan because they hadn't compiled any plan. And the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability did not hold them accountable, and have, to this date have yet to ask, where is the statewide plan? So nothing has been done to really address the problem. But what the report did do, what it did do was it unmasked the problem. Because before that, people only talked about the disproportionate suspension of black children. Anything that perceived to only affect black people in West Virginia, nobody would do anything about it. They would say it's normal, because something wrong with black people. They're some kind of way inferior. They got a problem. So this problem of discipline had been shaped and framed by the state in terms of how they would release data to suggest with only blacks. But when they had to disaggregate the data actually came back, and that 70% of all kids that are suspended from school are low-income children. And the overwhelming number, numerically, are white low-income children, because they make up such a large part of the student population. The black students make up about 5% of the state's total student school enrollment, but blacks make up about 10% of all student suspensions. So we are suspended at a rate twice our representation in the student body population. So that disproportionality that was first identified in 1976, reaffirmed in 1980, reaffirmed in 2012 by the state and by the University of Pennsylvania in 2015, it's still there and gotten slightly worse. But what the report did, it also shows that children with disabilities are disproportionately suspended. And the reason that's so important, because there's a federal statute, the Individual Disabilities Act, where those students are supposed to have some protection, right? That the schools are supposed to make certain allowances before they're suspended, but they're not doing it in many cases. Thirdly, lastly, it points out that the youth that have the highest suspension rate are kids in the child foster care system. So this was somewhat revelatory to a lot of people. Now, what is even more significant, when you stack all of it on there, you're black, you're low income, you got a disability, and you're in the foster care system, you're almost never in school, right? There's a cumulative effect where race always exacerbates the problem, and black kids are treated more harshly in the whole system. Now, to wrap this all up as to why I call this the silent underlying social condition, right? Unaddressed, unrecognized, and not fully understood. You've heard the term, many of you that were listening to this interview,